Saturday night, there are those who seek a party that ends. And Saturday night, there are those who seek a party that never ends. We seek the party that never ends. And you?
The center of all here is Jesus. All the rest, cathedral, assembly and preacher, are only signum et rimandum of the one truth.
Every time we pray a mystery of the Rosary, of the wedding of Cana, when we meditate, we can say, for example, looking at the index, so you can see on the handout that you received. Now we get a little deeper into how to marry the right ideal. Woman, what have I to do with thee? And so on. We make a little introduction. We have heard both the read text of the wedding of Cana. We also heard the song, The Wedding of the King. The most beautiful thing is when a soul marries the life of Jesus, because Jesus also went and evangelized. He prayed and went out and evangelized. So also Jesus goes to the wedding, normally. Not just that, also we are sometimes invited to participate at weddings in the church, and then to the restaurant, as when we went to your daughter's wedding, one of the last weddings we went to. With the excuse of the haircut, then we talk about Jesus, because people ask, we answer. So we make the little watery wedding, from a certain human maturity to a spiritual maturity. Regarding to holiness, many think, this is true, Dom Franco already knows this for a lifetime. Some of you do as well. Yet many think it's difficult for them to digest this, the fact that we all are called to holiness. I remember the first time when I went to Mexico. So I had one Bible at my side and one in Spanish in my pocket. But as I didn't speak Spanish yet, and then I read from the Bible, that is, it is written in the letter of St. Paul the Apostle, this is the will of God, your sanctification. The people were surprised. So this is the will of God. Yes, when you say our Father, you say, your will be done. And the will of God is this, St. Paul says, your sanctification. And not just in Mexico, in Spain, in France, in Italy, in Sicily. Sicily and Italy are the same thing, but I see in their eyes, are you saint? No. Yet we know that in the Second Vatican Council, where the Pope and the bishops were united, who wrote this dogmatic constitution, that says the universal calling is holiness. That is number 39 in Lumen Gentium, 40, 41, 42, because it stood out to me, very much so, when I read it. So Jesus tells us not just to be saints, yet even perfect, as the Father who is in heaven is perfect. So, to reach that holiness, of which Jesus told us, be perfect. In Greek it says, you will be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. So, the proof that we all can become saints, in whatever state of life, marrying partially or totally the way of Jesus in becoming saints, the proof is that many normal people like us, throughout the centuries, became saints in the history of the Church. So you imagine Mariella a saint, Ephesia a saint, Saint Francesco, Saint Guido, all saints. Just imagine the choir master a saint. Father has already the halo on his head. We are still at the beginning, still walking. And this is not small talk. This is the teaching of the Church, because Jesus says, who listens to you? That is, to the church, to the ecclesia. In Hebrew, kahal. In Greek, ecclesia, which means like an assembly of the people. Those who listen to you, this assembly of people that was chosen by Jesus. So the apostles, those who are sent, listen to me. And those who do not listen to you, don't listen to me. So the Church insists on that and wants us to become saints. Why? Is it because if we have the halo we are more beautiful, like St. Anthony over there? That we can reach holiness means that many won't go down, but that more will go to the party without end. We know that it is Jesus who saves the souls, but we said this already many times, that if we participate in the mystical body of Christ, we can enlarge the mercy of God. Now after the introduction, Now we want to become saints, marrying in all states of life the ideals of Jesus. Some to 30, some to 60, and some to 100%. So nobody is authorized to get discouraged. There's space for all. Every time when we go hitchhiking, but we can't all be like you, we are not ready, we can't do that. Yet who said that? Who tells you that you're far off if you already give us a ride? That's a sign of courage. There are many beautiful examples in history, as in practical life. So we read in the Gospel of John, "Woman, what do I have to do with thee?" So in our language, we can think about a mother who says to her son, who says to his mother. Just imagine that the son says, "Woman, what do I have to do with you?" And my mother could answer, "What the heck are you saying? What kind of religion is this? This way you treat your mother? And I taught you to be a loving person. Did I teach you nothing?" So now before we find an answer from a saint, a meditation came to my mind. Maybe Jesus is harsh with his mother, with Mary, to show the others a model. Because sometimes in communities, a parish priest or a bishop, cardinals, can be harsh with those who are subdued to them. You imagine a bishop who takes offense at the Pope, or a friar against the bishop, or a parish priest with the bishop, or in your families, children against parents. Everybody has a task, so everybody has to try, not to stay subdued, but to stay in line. And then in the right moment, you speak up. Otherwise, we'll kill each other. And Saint Louis de Montfort says this phrase. I want to read this out to you. From The True Devotion to Mary, number 5. St. Louis says, "Mary is the wonderful mother of the Son that he wanted to keep humble in secret during his life. To encourage humility, he calls her woman, as if she was a stranger, even though within him he had more esteem for her and loved her more than all the angels and human beings. So even though he loves her more than all, he is hard with her to tell the others that within us there's always that part that sometimes forgets to say thanks or to say something sweet. Or sometimes busy, one answers hard, yet also the others have to understand. So Mary, as an example of humility, Jesus tells her, "What have I to do with you? My hour has not yet come," which means then also the hour of the cross, the eschatological hour. Then all the theologians and exegetes see what comes to their heart, what the Spirit puts in their heart and proposes to them. Do whatever he tells you. Once I was in Lourdes, in total providence. And when you're not full of yourself, you can always learn from the others. Always. To give and take. That's our grace recycle. There was an African priest who with his French was a little difficult to understand, but he made me understand. That Mary says, do whatever Jesus tells you. But what does Jesus tell us? He says, do this in memory of me. Now check this out, how with a simple gesture you understand it even better. In order to focus on what Jesus tells us is what the Gospel tells us. Yet if you want to put focus on the verb, Jesus says, do this in memory of me. Especially the sign of the covenant, the communion. Under the Eucharistic species, there's the body and blood. Now I don't deepen this as a matter of historical discussion. Do this in memory of me. So once, to give you a little experience of mine, it truly happened that in Cosenza, close by the cathedral, I met a couple who didn't want to go to church. They didn't want to confess nor take Holy Communion. They said, you have to tell me where it is written that I have to take Holy Communion. It's enough for me to pray the Rosary. To go to church, I pray before Our Lady. She helps me to love Jesus more, and that's enough. However, I said, Mary says, do what he tells you. What does Jesus say? Do this in memory of me. Not all those who say, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but those who do the will of my Father in heaven. So that doing the will of God is principally not just to take the sacrament of communion, yet also, as our bishop says, and I heard this in Rome, where he said that at Holy Cross Church, but there's also a certain communion of life. So taking the sacrament of communion is not enough if then I step outside and someone hits me on the cheek and I hit them back. So we have to turn the other cheek. We have to strive to turn the other cheek, both physically and also on a moral level, and to give an answer as it is right. Because Jesus said in the Gospel, He answers when he is struck on the cheek. Why do you do this? If I did something wrong, show me. Otherwise, if I did nothing wrong, why do you hit me? So he's not quiet, he answers. Yet then he sees that they don't listen to him. So he says, do what you want. So do whatever he tells you. Is above all this indication to be complete in the new and eternal covenant in the Eucharist. So if you want to be allies of Jesus, one of our friars said, who studies in Rome at the Biblical Institute, as a simple person, even before he studied, you don't need a degree in theology to understand this. He said, we are allied with Jesus when we feed on the Eucharist. And this works in the car with the people. They say, I pray. But we say, you're not really an ally of Jesus. If you want to be allied with God, you need to feed on the Eucharist. Then you will be allied with God. Otherwise, you have a do-it-yourself covenant. When you tell the people that, they are amazed. In a simple way, but also based on Scripture. Divine Spirit. So in the wedding of Cana, we see that kind of transformation of which we will talk now in a deeper way. From water to wine, how to get from a human maturity to a divine maturity, so to the divine spirit, not the spirit of wine, yet the divine spirit. We will see also on a biological level how water is transformed into wine. We will also see what St. Augustine says about that. He says some beautiful things. We have to try to transform our human maturity into a certain spiritual maturity, into the fullness of the Son of God. Let's go on, so I won't make you fall asleep. We talked about this already in the groups of prayer. Some heard this and some did not. Yet tonight we want to explain it in Greek. I don't want to say, I hope I won't say nonsense, just to prevent that I would say nonsense. I checked on the words in Greek. What I'm saying now is not a dogma, yet it's a possible hypothesis, also to make a beautiful meditation on how to entrust our soul. How is the water transformed into wine? Some of you already know. Where could we also see that it is transformed? We already think of the 6 jars, that the water becomes wine in the 6 jars. We think of what was always said, yet if we look at the text, I read now literally how it is written in Greek, however I say it in Italian. The translation made word by word. So Jesus says, fill the jars with water, and they filled them until after. And he says unto the brim. And after that he said to them, now draw from it and bring it to the master of the table. So when he says fill, the first time, referring to the jars, he uses a verb, gemisate, which means to fill. Instead, when he says draw, then he says draw now and bring it to the master of the table. So this draw is antlesate, which is the same verb that he says afterwards. Now I tell you why. He says draw now and bring it to the master of the table. So they draw and bring it to the master of the table. They brought it to him. Yet when the head waiter tasted the water that had become wine, not knowing where it came from, instead the servants knew, because they had drawn water that became wine. The head waiter tasted and says the famous phrase. When it says they had drawn, the same verb is used. So they draw the water and bring it to the head waiter. And so I don't know if I was clear. Maybe I didn't explain myself well. So he says, draw now and bring it to the head waiter. And then he explains the water that had become wine, and he didn't know where it came from. Instead, the servants knew, because they had drawn the water. So they had drawn water. Now I was clearer. They had drawn water, and they bring the water to him, which then becomes wine. What I say is not dogmatic. Yet look at the Greek text. We could say that it is like that. But why should this be interesting to me? Because I like to play the expert? Or because I have to say something in Greek? I didn't even translate it perfectly. Why am I interested in this translation, in this observation? That the water is drawn and is carried in a cup by the servant. Before that they listen to Mary, who says, do what Jesus will tell you. And Jesus says, draw the water and bring it to the head waiter. So if we associate our human maturity, that is the water, with people that we see are obedient to Mary and to what Jesus says, or at least they try to obey Jesus, then our water, our human nature, our spirit, that is our human maturity, can be transformed in the divine spirit. That when we talk, we inebriate the others. Otherwise, when the others listen to us, we say in Sicilian that water leaves you just like that. Instead, wine opens your veins, enlarges them, and you feel better. Instead of sending the people when they have problems to the bar, listen well. There was a bar that was called Listen Well, I don't know if it still exists, which meant that if someone had problems, they got drunk. Instead, when we have the divine spirit, because Jesus says, my words are spirit and life, then we let the life of Jesus pass to the others. That is in the word, put into practice. We try to put it into practice. So if we entrust our soul to the apostles, because they were the apostles, so the church. So if we entrust our human maturity to the church, then we are sure, according to the words of Jesus, that it will be transformed in the divine spirit. Yet people of the church who try to listen to Mary and Jesus. For example, my soul serves the church, particularly with the community to our bishop, Stagliano, also to other bishops. However, I see that when I listen to Stagliano, that he really tries to. 5 years that I listen to him, I see that he strives to love Jesus and Mary, even when he's upset. Even when he goes against himself, he also risks taking us up. He took us up at a point in time where we were really needy. Yet, however, now many people want to listen to us, want to listen to our witness. Now I still had the time to prepare this catechesis, but I have to go to Rome. Because TV 2000 asked us for a witness. I, Friar Joseph, and Sister Veronica will go there. So tomorrow I will go in procession, and then I will head out immediately. And this is thanks to this key of reading that the Gospel provides. I entrust my soul to the Church, yet especially to those who try to obey the Gospel, who try to fight for it, even though they lose a little bit, together with other bishops in Rome. I now conclude the explanation of this part of the text. So we said, what do the 6 jars represent? The 6 jars remind us of the phrase of St. Paul, the famous phrase that says that we have a treasure in vessels of clay, meaning that we are weak, that we are always in a danger for the vessel to break and even to lose grace. One can say, I always make the same mistakes. So we have to strive not to make a mistake. We have to strive to never sin, yet not to pretend, because sometimes the Lord leaves a thorn in our side, in our flesh, so that we stay humble. So I tell you a little story, very simple. I think also I discovered who wrote it, Agostina. Some time ago she had an experience with the nuns in the cloister, before she got married. And this is the lady who defended me on Rai 3, and she wrote this story when she had her experience. I heard this from a bishop. There was the owner of a donkey with 2 jars. One was a little cracked and the other one was whole. So the whole jar said to the cracked, "You're good for nothing because you lose much of our owner's water. Why don't you throw yourself down? Why don't you break yourself completely? You're despicable because The owner has the water. He goes to the well to take water for the sheep, and you lose the water on the way. You have to die. Poor thing, she was already cracked, she was already humbled. So the next day she was all sad. So the owner said, "Well, what do you have? Why are you sad?" "Because I'm good for nothing. I'm worth dying. I'm worth being broken completely, of being thrown away because I lose water. You are a good owner. You are a good master. You are good." And the master says, "I show you something. Yes, you lose a little water on the way. But that's okay for me. Because in your weakness, I transform it in something beautiful." But what is the beautiful thing I'm doing? "Do you see all these flowers on the way that the donkey is walking on?" She says, "Yes, I see it. This is the water that you lose? Because it watered the ground. Because where you lost water, I got some seeds, I spread them where you lost the water. And they all flourished thanks to the water you lost." That doesn't mean that we have to sin. But the Lord can transform our weaknesses into the grace of humility. Humility comes from humus, which means earth. From this virtue grows, the flower grows, the good smell and the color comes forth. But when one is proud, then he explodes as soon as you touch him. So these jars represent in some way our life, and the water, more than a classic maturity, a human maturity, that we are all called to reach. Yet the only one who can transform that into the divine spirit that transforms the souls and to avoid suffering, as also the man who helped the one who was beaten up by the brigands, the Good Samaritan. He uses wine together with the hotel owner to take care of the wounds of the person. So the spirit of wine that recalls the divine spirit is the one that truly takes care of our wounds, more than the ones of the body, the ones of the spirit that are hard to heal. At the end, if you paid attention, at the end of this pericope of the Gospel, the text says that Mary went after the wedding with Jesus and the apostles to Capernaum. So also Mary was not always that classical woman that sows, prays and always stays home, closed in. But Mary, physically, she went after Jesus, physically, like the pious women. So the wedding of Cana, when we truly meet Jesus, the true miracle is when we are transformed, or when we see that something truly changes, that Jesus worked. Then I have to go and tell the others. As the woman in chapter 4, the Samaritan woman, because when Jesus told her something that struck her, she went to tell the others. So Mary goes with Jesus for a short time, even if just for a short time, yet she goes down to Capernaum. So also we are called, if we had this little wedding with Jesus in our life, to announce what we have seen. See how beautiful this passage of Augustine is, that you heard already in another place when it talks about the demonstration of the existence of God. When St. Thomas speaks about the 5 proofs of the existence of God, which we already did. But even before that, in the patristic age, we spoke about St. Augustine. He spoke about the extraordinary miracle from water into wine, and the ordinary miracle of the rain that transforms inside the vine and produces the grapes, and then it becomes wine. Here he says it almost the same way. He changes the way he explains it, and he adapts it to the wedding of Cana. The miracle by which our Lord Jesus Christ transforms water into wine is not a miracle in the eyes of the one who knows that it was made by God. Indeed, the one who produced the wine in the 6 jars at the wedding of Cana, the 6 jars that he had filled them up with water, is the same who does something similar with the vine. What the servants filled in the jars was transformed into wine by God's action, just as by his action he transforms into wine that which rains down from the clouds. See, here speaks about the ordinary miracle. We marvel when the water transforms into wine because it's extraordinary, but we don't marvel at the miracle that happens every day. That is, when rain falls on the earth from the clouds, goes into the vine, then in the grapes, and through the work of men, this time not by the work of God, it is transformed into wine. Then later on, I just tell you this little thing of Saint John Paul II, who says that this transformation of water into wine wants to sum up the transformation of a human maturity of the ancient Hebrew law into the wine of the new covenant. So he makes a little bit the difference between water and wine. Not me, but John Paul II. This is not offensive, but it just completes the Old Testament. The wedding banquet points to the covenant of God with His people, of Christ and His church. This is the focus. And then I think it's still John Paul II who says that the wine represents the blood. The water is the human maturity that transforms into the divine spirit. My words are spirit and life, especially when they're practical. And then until the spreading of blood, that we witness to this, to Jesus, who let Himself be killed. This is the miracle. One like Edith Stein, Saint Benedetta of the Cross, who was an atheist. From an atheist like Hebrew, then she became a believer, then she became a Christian, then a Catholic, then a cloistered nun, and then she let herself be killed. Here's also another miracle of the wedding of Cana, of our time. So from the human philosophy one passes on to the divine philosophy. And then Saint Bonaventure says something to which we have to pay attention, because in the Middle Ages there was too much talk about Aristotle, a philosopher before Jesus, who did a pretty systematic work, so interesting, but he wasn't Jesus. So Saint Bonaventure says, let's pay attention not to do an inverted miracle, so that we don't transform the wine into water, but water into wine. So we have to pass from philosophy to theology and not from theology to philosophy. From human talk to divine talk. From human life to divine life, and not the opposite. I want to say some things that are foundational. Something that St. Thomas says. The guarantee that God perfects the human life. Let's think about our human nature. That sometimes we say, for you I would throw myself down from the 6th level. Or also when two are engaged, they tell each other many beautiful words before their wedding, but then they disappear. But then they vanish. Like snow in the sun. I believe that our nature can pass beyond these things. If we treat the matrimony in the way that Jesus communicated it to us, that man shouldn't separate what God has united. So a unity that has to be built up every day. And the indissolubility. Our human nature, I think, has to make a commitment that goes beyond our own possibilities. So humanly speaking, that would be impossible. But God, and not you, will make it possible. I wanted to tell you a little story to highlight what Father Franco said. I was struck especially by one of the last things that he said, when this wife said, he let me have an experience to also love a little. I drew a heart next to a phrase in order to highlight the beauty of married life. And next to a passage, and you know St. Paul. But in reading this passage better, I understood that he implicitly says, this beautiful thing, listen. Speaking not only of the husband, but also of the wife. The husband who does not believe, listen to this beautiful phrase, is sanctified by a wife who has faith. Here we are in the letter to the Corinthians. Maybe also Peter says it. But here we should memorize in chapter 7, then Peter draws on this. But then I saw something that I never paid attention to, that it says the wife who doesn't have faith. So you see also the wives are sometimes the contrary of good. So the wife who does not have faith is sanctified by the husband who has faith. So as Father Franco said, married life. Or could also be religious life. Or the ordained priesthood. That yes, that is said in front of the altar, in front of the Lord and in front of the people, is truly a serious task that empowers the words that we say. A person who does not keep the promise and does not admit that it was a mistake, but continues to insist that they are right, these people seriously risk to have no credibility. If someone says instead, hey, I was weak, I didn't make it, that's different. This time we spoke about the beauty of married life. So who wants to dig deeper, you can find this published on the website, like the other outlines. You can download it for free. In all the catechesis that we do, there's some passages from the Old Testament, the New Testament, from the Fathers of the Church, the Middle Ages. To check on the topic Cum Deo and Cum Ecclesia, according to God and according to the Church. Today I've seen another miracle. Father Franco will correct me if I'm wrong. A little miracle. Miracle in Greek means a sign, something that points to something greater. And it is all of you. Because you are few, but not a few for this day. Because instead of watching the soccer game, as I was also first tempted to watch it, even though I don't like it, but I heard so much about it. In Agrigento, where we just came from, Friar Michael and Dominic, they watched the game. Because after the game they will give a talk about the passage of St. Paul that speaks about the difference of a human kind of sport that teaches you the rules and the beauty of it and being honest. But then one has to go ahead and pass to the spiritual sports in order to win an eternal cup. Not like the crown of the sportsman of this world that gets rusty, says St. Paul. An eternal, incorruptible crown. This is what our faithfulness will bring us. So the miracle is that instead of being at the game, you are here. Now we finish with a joke that makes us laugh but also reflect. There was a woman who came from Lourdes. So she got to the border control because at the time there was no European Union. So she came from Lourdes to Italy in her car. So the finance police stopped her. She had a load of those nice big bottles in the shape of Our Lady of Lourdes in her car, full of water. So the police officer asked her, "What do you have in your car? Let's open and see. Let's check." "There's no need. It's water from Lourdes. There's no need." "Ma'am, open and let's check." "Go ahead." So he opens it and smells it and says, "Ma'am, this is grappa." "A miracle, a miracle. Our Lady worked a miracle. There's grappa, ma'am." "A miracle, a miracle." The water transformed into grappa. There are some who want to climb over elsewhere, as Jesus says, the one who does not enter a sheepfold through the gate and doesn't enter through the door is Jesus. He says, "I am the door," is a thief and a robber. So those who want to show the gold that doesn't exist, because they say not everything that shines is gold, also is a robber and a thief of words. So we say that we suffer to stay submitted to the rules, so at some point we suffer, but internally we have peace. Because we strive to be in full communion with the Lord. So the more we draw close to the full communion of life with Jesus, and that Jesus wants from us, the more we will be in peace, even in the midst of sufferings.